Dr. Pachauri and friends. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the Baha'i International Community's United Nations office, to this breakfast event to launch an appeal on the moral and ethical dimensions of climate change. My name is Baha'i and I'm the principal representative here. And I'm going to introduce to you Tahira Naila, representative of the Baha'i International Community, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the appeal and then introduce Dr. Pachauri.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. We're very excited today on behalf of all the organizations that have signed and supported the appeal to world leaders on the moral and ethical dimensions of climate change to formally present it to you today. The appeal to world leaders, which you have here in the program that we handed out, calls upon member states to consider deeply the ethical and moral questions at the root of the climate change crisis. It asks that the leaders recognize that the quest for climate justice is not a competition for limited resources, but part of an unfolding process towards greater degrees of unity among nations as they endeavor to build a sustainable, just, and peaceful civilization. It asks that they distinguish their contributions to these negotiations by demonstrating trust, justice, solidarity, and a vision of prosperity for the most vulnerable populations. It also asks them to demonstrate courage and moral leadership as they articulate the vision and secure the foundations for a comprehensive, just, and legally binding agreement in Copenhagen. And finally, it asks them to ensure that commitments in all arenas of the climate change challenge are guided by ethical and moral considerations so as to inspire the trust and confidence of individuals, communities, and institutions to effect the changes needed to build a sustainable civilization. So this appeal is part of an ongoing effort to highlight the ethical dimensions of climate change, and we've been collaborating with a growing number of non-governmental organizations, academics, and member states to raise and identify the ethical questions that we believe are at the crux of the climate crisis. We know that the scientific, political, and economic realities of the climate crisis have to be addressed, and they are, but it is the moral imperative that provides the will for action. So we hope that you will support this appeal, share it with your networks. We're happy to provide you with more information if you'd like to speak to us after. And we recommend, if you're interested in learning more about it, there's an excellent blog that has been set up by Penn State University called climateethics.org. And it was rated one of the top 10 environmental blogs by Time magazine. So it's an excellent source for looking at the key ethical issues in the ongoing negotiations leading to Copenhagen. So we're very pleased now to welcome Dr. Pachauri, Director General of TERI and Chair of the Nobel Prize-winning Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to address us. Dr. Pachauri.
Thank you very much. I must, at the outset, apologize for being late. It's not my habit to be late to any event. It's something that gives me a great deal of discomfort, but if I can be totally honest with you, I didn't set my alarm properly. And when I got up, I realized, oh my God, I'm going to rush, and I tried. But then with all the barricades and the number of checks you have over here, that slows you down by at least 10 minutes or so. But thank you for being so patient and waiting for me to speak to you. This is indeed an extremely important dimension of what we need to do about climate change. I'll start with a brief anecdote. It was on the 3rd of October in 2007, and I was in London with a colleague from the IPCC. We had an interactive session with Reuters, and we talked a great deal about what was there in the 4th assessment report of the IPCC. And at the end, one of my friends, Alistair Doyle, who works for Reuters, based in Norway, he says, how would it feel if you're asked to go and receive the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the IPCC? I said, what are you talking about? He says, don't you know that the IPCC has been nominated? I said, I know nothing about it. So I just let it slip out of my mind. And then I thought a little more. And I said to myself that if peace is at stake on account of what we are doing to the Earth's climate, then there's a huge rationale for considering perhaps what the IPCC has done, modest as it might be. I thought to myself that maybe the Norwegian Nobel Committee has some rationale behind the fact that they've entertained the IPCC. Anyway, I forgot about it, and 2 or 3 days later, I got an email or two from a few friends, and they asked what's happening, and I said, I know nothing about it. So then, where does one go for information but to Google? And I found there were 183 so-called nominations. I said, well, that gives you about maybe 0.5% chance of making it. And then I got a couple of telephone calls and emails, and then I said, let's go to Google again. And by then the betting sites had taken over, and they were placing 3 entities at the top. One was Al Gore, and the other was the IPCC, and the lady who's in Canada, the Inuit. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name. Sheila. That's right, that's right. So then somebody came and interviewed me, and they said, what do you feel? I said, well, if anybody has to get it, it should be Al Gore. Because here is a person who was Vice President of the US, had the presidency snatched away from him, and he could easily have gone into a corner and sulked away and just felt sorry for himself, but he decided to use his convictions and move on and do something about the whole issue of climate change. So I'm mentioning this only because, you know, I think it is critically important that we look at all the dimensions of climate change, and it seems to me that peace is going to be absolutely essential if we want to maintain social stability across the world. And in some sense, it is in our interest. And it's also because we have to be truthful, we have to be honest about these things. You know, Mahatma Gandhi used to say that truth should be followed, not just because honesty is the best policy, because the moment you equate something as important as that to policy, then clearly you have devalued the very concept of truth. And I believe that in the case of climate change, we really need to raise the debate to a level where we get above the issue of policy, because the moment you start looking purely at policy, then you're going to start evaluating costs and benefits. And once you do that, you're obviously going to load the dice. You would say, my God, it's much too costly to take action. We lose jobs, we lose economic output. But in some sense, there has to be some degree of what I might call an evangelical fervor about doing the right thing. And why? Because you're dealing with issues of intra-generational and intergenerational equity. And the intra-generational part is something that, I'm sorry, a lot of people in North America just don't know anything about. I mean, you have to go to a place like the Maldives Islands, you have to go to a place like Bangladesh, you have to go and see the glaciers in, you know, the third pole of the world.